From the International Command Center of the Pastor at Yahoo, coming at you live. I am Pastor Steve, and this is my son Josh joining me for Rapid Read a Psalm a Day, Psalm 52. Good morning, Josh.
Hello, Pastor Steve.
You don't want to call me Dad. What's up, Daddy-o?
What you drinking there, homie?
This is, I call it hot tang, which makes Pam really, really mad because it's something from Melaleuca that is good for you. It's an immunity booster called Activate, and you can drink it cold or hot. But if I drink it hot, it tastes like hot tang, and it's yummy. I love it.
All right.
But coherent coffee.
I should be drinking coherent coffee. I'm sorry. Pam's like over there saying, "What? Your son runs a coffee company. What are you doing drinking hot tang?" I had my coffee earlier today. Anyways, so I am live in my command center. You're live in your command center because not only do you work from home online there, but you also do a lot of your ministry at Crossroads online as well now, don't you?
Yes. So I'm the middle school director for Crossroads, and have about 50 to 75 middle schoolers we see on a weekly basis, and they're a big part of what we do, and just love doing ministry from the time I was in your church to now. So yeah.
And you have something tonight you're doing?
We did our Wednesday service yesterday, and then tonight you're going to join me, and we're going to go through prayer. We're going through the 12-step prayer, just like you took your church through. We're going through it. It's something I use in my own life for my own prayer life, and I've taken my kids through a couple of years ago, and we're going to revisit it on our Instagram. We did it last week, and we're going to go through steps 2 and 3 tonight.
5 o'clock, Crossroads Instagram. All right, let's jump right into Psalm 52. To the choir master, we'll read alternating verses. A maskil of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul, quote, "David has come to the house of Ahimelech." We'll talk about that later. "Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The steadfast love of God endures all day."
Your tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, you worker of deceit.
Nice guy he was. "You love evil more than good, and lying more than speaking what is right."
You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue.
But, here's a big but of the Bible, but God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living.
The righteous shall see and fear and shall laugh at him, saying, quote,
"See the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and sought refuge in his own destruction."
But I'm like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever.
"I will thank you forever because you have done it. I will wait for your name, for it is good in the presence of the godly." And may God bless the reading of his word. Let's go back up to verse 1. And since this is a psalm that has a history before it, he talks about this guy. He kind of explains where he comes from. So give us kind of the background of Doeg the Edomite.
Yeah, so this is a psalm written by David, and he was on the run from Saul. So Saul was the first king of Israel. He's jealous of David and his success and killing Goliath. So he decides, all right, I'm just going to kill David, God's anointed.
So this is before David became king. It's when he was promised to be king, but was still just a servant in the king's court, right?
Correct. And he was good friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. And Jonathan gave him a heads up, yo, my dad's losing it and he's going to kill you. So David goes on the run, and he goes and hides in a field all night or something, and then he goes on the run, and he goes to he runs to a whole other town and called Nob, and there's a priest there, and he's like, "Hey, I can't tell you what's going on, but I'm on a secret mission." So he kind of lies to the priest and just says, bottom line, I need a sword and some food. And the priest says, "Okay, well, you're God's anointed. Here you go. We happen to have Goliath's sword here in the back. Let me just give it to you. And here's some special consecrated bread. Take it."
Wait, he actually had Goliath's sword? That's interesting.
He said, "I'm a priest and this is a church. I don't have any swords, but I happen to have Goliath's sword on display as a illustration of the cool stuff that God did for Israel. So that's the only weapon we have in the whole joint, but take it and go."
That'd be like taking the cross off the wall in the church and going to battle with it.
Basically, yeah. So he takes Goliath's giant sword and says, there is none like it, and walks out the door. Anyway.
So where does Doeg come in the story?
So the bummer is, like, at that place was this guy Doeg, who was loyal to Saul, and sometime later, he's back with Saul, and Saul's on his "Let's kill David" mission, and Doeg's like, "Oh, by the way, you're David. I know exactly where he was. He was talking to this priest over in Nob. Let's go find out," and whatever. So they go, and Saul essentially kills the priest and all his priest workers who work with him. I think there was like 80 something priests who worked with him in the, I don't know, church or temple or whatever it was. And then I think they killed the whole town, like the entire town of Nob. They're just like, yeah, sucks for you guys. And they just wasted the whole town.
Ooh. So when David is complaining to the Lord about Doeg the dog, he's also probably complaining about Saul, the anointed king, who's gone a little bit berserko and is using his power to destroy people.
Yeah, so certainly Saul is at fault here, but Doeg is kind of like a special kind of evil in a way. All the priests, they rounded up all the priests, and Saul actually told all his bodyguards or whatever, like, hey, why don't you guys kill all these priests? And they all looked at him and were like, Saul, no, they're priests. We're not going to do that. And Doeg was like the only one in the whole court who was evil enough and wicked enough to be like, okay, I'll do it. And it wasn't just that it's not just a story of, oh, this guy tattled on someone. He was the only one wicked enough to just strap on a sword and kill 85 innocent people.
Wow.
So it's not just like, oh, he's kind of a bad guy. He's like really kind of despicable.
So then that makes sense more when David is going on and saying, look at your work. Pam was noticing, what was it? You said there's 4 things in your notes? Pam was noticing 4 things that Doeg did. He plotted destruction, he worked deceit, he loved evil, and he lied. Those 4 things. And so she came up with malice, falsehood, subtlety in sin, and affection to sin is kind of what describes Doeg the dog. And so we want to make sure we're not that way, right? That we don't have those attributes in our life, that we're not given over to the dark side, so to speak.
Yeah. So
because verse 5 is very clear. Even if and this is true, isn't it true? It's like there's always bad guys. There's always the turncoats. There's always the Benedict Arnolds. There's always the terrorists. There's always the Doeg the dogs. But in verse 5 it says, but God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. And so we don't have to necessarily take our vengeance on them. If you remember, there was lots of times David had the chance to counteract Saul or to kill Saul. But he's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take vengeance in my own hands. He's the anointed one. He's the leader. He's the president. He's the king. I'm going to leave it in God's hands to deal with him. I'm going to trust that God will be my judge. And so it's interesting that there's a judgment of God, but we don't necessarily have to be the one to take the vengeance on people that are even the dogs in our life. We can trust that God will handle it.
That's good.
What about verses 6, 7, and 8? This is kind of the turning point, and I want to know if you have any thoughts on that. About okay, so the righteous will see and fear; they shall see the guy that wouldn't make God his refuge, and he ends up getting destroyed. But this verse 8, and I think this is where we want to be. You as my son, we've always tried to have this idea that we live in the blessing of God, that like the prayer of Jabez kind of idea, that we're so thankful that we are this green olive tree in the house of the Lord, that we can trust in his steadfast love forever. Whatever's going on around us, our idea is that we want to be planted where God wants us to be, and that we would flourish. Even if you extrapolate that to Revelation, where it talks about the river that comes from the throne of God, and the tree of life is there, and we eat of the fruit of the tree of life, and we're blessed forever. It's the idea that we can flourish if we bloom where we're planted, so to speak. We don't have to chase after the things of this world or grab our own or make our own success. That we actually can flourish by becoming what God has designed us to be.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of really obvious things in here, right? We don't want to be Doeg, who's selling people out, and we don't want to be Saul, who's using his authority for evil and wicked, and not only chasing after David, but bringing other people into his circle of evil, right? He brought Doeg in and got him to kill all these people. We obviously don't want to be them. And obviously, there's like the good side of David, right? You guys did Psalm 51 yesterday, where David confesses and his heart shows that it's right for God. There's like lots of aspects of David we want to do. Verse 8, we want to be the green olive tree in the house of God. But what about, like, when I taught this to my middle schoolers, there's kind of a discussion we had around what can we learn from David, who lied in the first place to put everyone in this position. He definitely put the priest in a bad position by showing up and not telling him why he was there. And it doesn't really show up in this psalm, but in 1 Samuel 21 and 22, he does kind of admit, like, dude, I kind of messed up. Like I knew that day when I was there that this was going to come back and something bad was going to happen.
This might be a little political, so I don't really have an answer for it, but it kind of, this story of David, he did other things like that too. Like one time I think he counted the people when he wasn't supposed to, right? And a plague came on the people. People died because of what the leader did that was abusing his authority. And so there's a lot right now in our world because we're in a pandemic and there's this virus and they're trying to stop it and they're locking people down and they're telling you what you can do in business. And one of the things in scripture, it tells us to pray for those in authority because there's a lot of responsibility. If you're running a city or a state or a country and you're making decisions that are affecting people's lives, even if you're good-hearted like David was, you can make mistakes that ends up getting people killed. And so instead of just always being mad or picketing or rioting, what we learned just the other day in one of these devotions was that the call for us, it says, first of all, I beseech you to make prayers and petition for all those, and especially those in authority. Number one thing we should be doing is supporting them in prayer because there is a lot of responsibility for being a leader of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, one thing I just take away from this is if you really, really trust in God, like verse 8 says, I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. If you really trust in God, I think there's a way you trust him with your life when you don't have to lie or rely on your own means to accomplish his will, which I think is what David did by lying to the priest. Was David's life spared and did he live? Yeah, but at what cost? He got all these priests killed. So yes, I think there's something to this psalm, and it's cool. Like this psalm's great. I'm a green olive tree in the house of God I trust, but I think there's another level to that, which is if you really, really trust God, are you willing to trust him with everything, with your life, with your finances, everything, all the way without intervening on your own or doing something outside of his will?
And it seems the biblical record shows not only with David, but other characters. One that comes to my mind is Abraham. God had these great promises for Abraham, but when he got frustrated and took matters into his own hands, literally, he ended up producing an enemy nation by his good idea. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so you're right. There's a tough balance there because we're called to hear from God and to have wisdom and to act accordingly. But if we think that our own ideas, our plans, we take matters in our own hands because God's not acting. Pam was talking about that. One of the hardest things is that active waiting on God, trusting in God. In fact, that's how it ends. Look at verse 9. I will wait for your name, for it is good. It's really hard to wait on God. It was Saul himself who, remember, wouldn't wait on Samuel the prophet to show up. And so he went in and tried to do the sacrifice himself. And that's when God said, this kingdom is no longer yours. You've been rejected now because of what you've done. So there is that undercurrent that we really need to learn to trust God and not take matters in our own hands, unless directed by God. But I'm talking about our own ideas, our own thoughts, our own rescue plan. Mm-hmm. We have to trust God, and that's hard to do, especially when the world is crazy.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, this has been Rapid. Read a Psalm a Day, Psalm 52, May 14th, and I've been joined by my son, Josh. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with more. Bye, Josh.
See you later, Padre.
Don't leave the